Thank you for having me here today. And what I want to talk about is how certain ideas about technology have had a very influential role in shaping the kind of tools and software that we use today. And in particular, how one mathematical way of seeing the world, like the gentleman that came before, he said the technology is a mathematical construct, but the argument that I would also make is that technology is also a social construct. And the ideas that technologists have shape the result of the technology that we create. And how the technologists, in particular, became victim to a certain way of seeing the world that originally they sought to fight against. And when faced with the complexity of the world that we're living in, they instead retreated. And the reason they did this was because it was reassuring and it was comforting. But what this has allowed to happen is that problems or things that are outside of our viewpoint have started to emerge. And we've retreated into a dream world where nothing really makes sense. And we're also partly the people that created that. And in this talk, I want to talk about certain types of particular ideas that had a very important effect on the technology that we use today. And I also want to talk specifically about about one guy called John McAfee, who was a communist who had ideas about technology that were very influential in leading to the development of the personal computer and internet. So about who we are a group of revolutionary hackers that believe that the technology world is fragmented, that it's lacking vision and a sense of purpose, that everybody is so concerned with growth and advancement forwards that we've lost sight of where exactly are we heading towards. And in particular, how we apply these techniques or tools of power towards shaping or constructing the society that we want to move towards. And our story actually begins with John McAfee and the development of artificial intelligence, which after World War II, during World War II, Alan Turing, his lover, his best friend, died, and he in trying to find meaning or sense for his friend's death, he became fascinated with how human intelligence worked. And he tried to make sense of that through mathematics. And the approach that was pioneered by Alan Turing in artificial intelligence reached the dead end, and the entire field stopped until another guy came along called Donald Mickey, who had also been working, a colleague of Alan Turing's, but was a biologist, and he pioneered a new biological approach to artificial intelligence. And John McAfee came in that moment of time when there was this big division in artificial intelligence between, on the one side, a mathematical and symbolic approach, who they believed that human intelligence and thought could be described through equations, through expressions that reflected the structure of our brain, versus another side who believed in constructing machines that emulated thought and intelligence and growing these, like the techniques of neural networks, that was a cognitive and a biologist-based approach. And John McAfee, his father was a labor organizer, and his mother was very active in the suffragette movement. And they were both members of the Communist Party. And John McAfee was also a communist. And when he saw that at the time these big, large computers, that when the programmers wanted to develop software on the computers, that they would have to reserve a time on the computer to use the computer to write their software, and maybe they'd misplace a comma, or they'd make a small mistake, and they'd have to make a new appointment 3 days later to be able to use the machine. He thought that wouldn't it be more efficient if they could get immediate feedback, and there was some way of sharing a computer between a group of people. If a computer was like a utility, like electricity, and that was where he developed the idea of computer utility. And that idea inspired his other colleagues at MIT, who started a project called Project Mac. And the head of this lab, Licklider, J.K. Licklider, he actually took this idea even further, and he proposed, what if we developed a intergalactic global computer system, like a space of computing, where people could go into this space and access this power of computing. And Project Mac was the project that later got adopted by, what they actually built was a system, a time-sharing system for computers. And there's actually a quote about it, which was, when they developed this time-sharing computer operating system, one of the great unanticipated discoveries of Project Mac was that when more than one person can use a computer at the same time, those people use the computer to communicate with each other. And that project led to the development of Multics, which led to the development of Unix, which is the basis of all the modern operating systems we use today. And also that project, Project Mac, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, America saw how slow their information systems were to respond to the crisis, and they went to the MIT lab, and John McAfee, Licklider said, we have the solution. It's this time-sharing system that will make your communication systems more efficient. And ARPANET ended up funding that system, and the result of that was the internet. So then later, John McAfee, together with Marvin Minsky, founded the Artificial Intelligence Lab. And at the Artificial Intelligence Lab, they started working with a computer called the PDP-10. And this was the origin of the early hacker movement. And later, John McAfee took that AI laboratory to Stanford. And that was where a lot of hackers started to come together at these artificial intelligence laboratories to develop not just artificial intelligence, but a whole range of new software for people to be able to communicate, people to be able to form new forms of governance and economic management over the internet. And it was very idealistic spaces that were being created by these early idealistic pioneers of computing. And the colleague of John McAfee was a guy called Marvin Minsky. Now, in the 60s, so that was the quote. So that's PDB-10. In the 60s, there was this idea of using a kind of brain cell in a computer, which today we call neural networks, which they called the perceptron, which was a way of building a form of intelligence inside the computer. And what happened was that the mathematicians, one of the colleagues of, which was Marvin Minsky, that co-founded the Artificial Intelligence Lab, actually wrote a book. And in this book, he used mathematics to prove why the biologist approach to intelligence and to computing was wrong. And that book has been cited as why the artificial intelligence winter in the 70s and early 80s, why research into artificial intelligence just kind of stopped. The actual field itself went through a huge amount of hype where they were promising more and more bigger things to their funders, and because they weren't able to deliver on the things that they promised, the next year they would promise even bigger things. And they just weren't able to deliver the promises that they were delivering. And this book by Marvin Minsky just dealt a blow to artificial intelligence. And meanwhile, in the 80s, the field of computing had advanced well beyond its initial stage. The ideas of time-sharing systems, of internet, and so on, and the personal computer, which was developed by these idealistic hackers. And what happened now was the industry saw an opportunity. A huge amount of capital started to flow into this previously marginalized computer. And a lot of these hackers started to throw themselves at these large companies. And in the process of commercialization, which was something very important because it was what allowed this product of computers to be made into a tool that we can use today, like mobile phones and laptops and so on. But in that process, something that had been the beating heart of this movement was being lost. Previously, people used to share the code between each other. People used to have this vision or sense of destination and ambition. They were not just specialists in technology. They were philosophers. They were people who knew about history. They had a sense of politics. And they were actively trying to think, how do we use technology to better improve the world around us, to better improve humanity? But that culture began to change. Now it became solely about how do we make profit. Companies started to silo off their code. They started to say, this is our technology. This is proprietary technology. And a lot of the hackers just went along with it. But there was a few hackers who didn't. And in particular, there was one guy called Richard Stallman who said, no, this is wrong. That technology is something that is for all of humanity. It is not just to enrich a small elite or a few private companies. And he actually proposed, he said to the hacker community, it doesn't have to be this way. We can build our own operating system. And he released a manifesto in 1985 called the GNU Manifesto. And in that manifesto, he laid out a plan or a vision for a computer operating system. He actually said, these are the tools that we need to make. This is the progress we're making. This is how this thing is going to be organized. And a lot of people thought that he was simply crazy, that it was just impossible for a group of hackers by themselves, without any funding, to develop their own operating system. But he went and he did it, and he was successful in the early 90s. That led to the development of Linux. Meanwhile, in 1991, Philip Zimmermann, because encryption software was classified as a munitions, released the world's first freely available encryption software for the masses to use. At the time, encryption technology was only in the hands of military and private corporations. It was classified by the US government as an export. So the US government arrested him, and he was facing a court case where he could go to prison for 10 years. And the way that Philip Zimmermann managed to get around that case is that he printed the source code for this software in a book that he sold internationally. Anybody could buy this book, and they could scan the pages of this book with the source code, and they could convert it to text using an OCR scanner, and they could compile it to the program. Through this process, Philip Zimmermann actually used the First Amendment as a way of protecting programmers. That was when code became speech. That was when programmers realized that we can write code, and our code is a form of speech. There is nothing that the authorities or the states can use to stop us. And that was in 1991 when Philip Zimmermann did that really important piece of action. In 1992, we saw the Crypto-Anarchist Manifesto, which actually said that with this new power of cryptography, we can overthrow the states, we can overthrow the governments, we have a power now to challenge the existing power of state. And in 1993, we saw the Cypherpunks Manifesto, which said that now, with this new power of technology, we had the ability to anonymize our communications, that now the police and the state could no longer intervene in the private affairs of citizens. In 1996, saw the publication of John Perry Barlow's A Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. In that declaration, he said he made a departure from the earlier ideals of the hackers, where we were saying that we were going to use this power of technology to shape the world around us. And he said that cyberspace is a new world, and that we are going to withdraw away into cyberspace, and that this was a world where everybody was equal, where power no longer had a role to play, and we exist in a new world outside of the confines of power. Meanwhile, Richard Stallman's free software movement was in full swing. It developed Linux. Linux was a far superior operating system to competition. Linux was making really powerful inroads into the supercomputer and the server market. And the entire community was developing really great software. It was very active. Every town and city had a Linux user group. And that group, but what Richard Stallman did is he took a hands-off approach to the movement. Sorry, do I have 5 minutes more? All right, yeah. And instead of being more active in playing a role in shaping how this movement would result, he took a hands-off approach, and a new group of guys came along, and they said, we're going to turn this free software into a business. And one of these guys was Eric Raymond, who released the book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And in that book, he said that developing this software was no longer about ideals. It was no longer about freedom, and it was simply a matter of cost and convenience for the individual. And this method of developing software was far superior to the older method of developing software, and that it would win in a marketplace spontaneously. In 1999, we saw the release of Napster. Napster was a file-sharing site for people to share music, and it was a decentralized file-sharing site, but they had centralized trackers. And they got into a legal battle with the music industry, and they lost that battle, and they got shut down eventually. With the shutdown of Napster led to the development of Friendster. Friendster developed into MySpace. MySpace developed into Facebook. And there was another guy that came along called Bram Cohen, and he actually came out. He was a guy that was really into maths puzzles, into solving problems, and he came up with the idea that we could actually decentralize every aspect of this file-sharing technology, and we could use that to make the effects of litigation from copyright industry completely powerless. And that was when he released BitTorrent. And BitTorrent actually set off a whole avalanche of political movements in the technology world. It was what led to a lot of new ideas about the swarm, about the crowd, about things like Wikipedia, about the Pirate Party. It was a time when people really started to talk about decentralization. We started to talk about how the process of management and governance could be decentralized. It could be a mechanism where nobody was in charge. At the same time, we had lost what had been the core of this movement. We lost sight of the role that ideas play in shaping the development of technology. We suddenly became really focused on finding that perfect arrangement of techniques to manage a stable society. From BitTorrent, we saw development of Bitcoin. Bitcoin was also based off of the crypto-anarchists and the cypherpunks. And then there was Vitalik, and Vitalik really saw the blockchain and Bitcoin, the earlier ideas of the computer scientists, of making a global computer, of a global computing space, that now this blockchain technology could enable us to actually make that in cyberspace. And they developed this technology of Ethereum, and it was really founded on an idealistic premise that we would now have this new tool that we could use that would enable people to create a whole new form of economy or governance. But very quickly, it got taken over by ICOs and pump and dumps and money-making schemes. And in general, that's what the cryptocurrency world has been taken over. It was advertised as code that was unstoppable. There was the DAO, which was meant to be an autonomous organization for funding projects with unstoppable code. And it got hacked, and literally hundreds of millions of dollars were lost. The Bitcoin price tanked. It's been tanking ever since, and literally in 2 weeks it dropped from 20K to 6K. So we're in the cryptocurrency world now, we find ourselves in a really strange place. There was an older view of technology that was gave the impetus for cryptocurrency to advance as a project. However, now those ideas have exhausted their potentiality to advance the movement along forwards. And faced with the complexity of the world around them, all of the cryptocurrency people are retreating into a dream world, into a fantasy world where cryptocurrency is an inevitability. The progress or march forwards of this cryptocurrency is inevitable, is unstoppable, and it is going to change the world. And feeling failed, nobody wants to admit that our ideas earlier of cryptocurrency, of overthrowing the banks, of overthrowing the states, of being able to construct a new economy, to be able to shape the world around us, going to Africa, going to these countries to liberate people from old structures of power, have been lost from the community. That dialogue, that kind of this rhetoric has gone completely. Instead, what has replaced it is this new idea of constructing apps on blockchain, of making a world where we can withdraw into and to be comfortable, where we don't have to deal with the emerging problems of the world around us. Now, I've run out of time, but there are 4 really important points that I think that need to be the focus of a technology movement that we need to put at the center. That as a technologist, we aren't simply disconnected driving forwards, but we have to understand where the technology is situated. What strategic projects do we try to accomplish? What areas do we target our focus so that we don't become completely dispersed as a movement? That means that we have to develop a clear, coherent vision of the society that we're trying to create, that we're trying to go forwards. And that means philosophy, it means sociology, it means politics. That it's not simply about constructing some new piece of technology, but it's about targeting that software for socio-political change in the world around us. We exist in the world. We are not outside of the world. As technologists, we have a power, like Hypatia in Alexandrian library, when all of the mob came to burn down the library because these scientists locked themselves into an elite castle away from the society while all the people around them suffered. It's not just about one piece of technology, but it's about how do all of these technologies together work to form an ecology? How do this synthesis on a human scale can be adapted by individuals for a multiple variety of purposes that serve their needs? Not just finding the one perfect app that works for people in India and China and America. It needs to be that there is a toolkit, or there is a way that individuals are able to apply these tools to solve particular local problems in different domains. And part of that is about the education, is about training technologists to be able to, with the full knowledge of the society, of the politics, of the vision that we're heading towards, and of the technology and how they apply that technology, able to go into a wide variety of different areas to be able to coordinate work together. And so what does this mean? It means there's a huge amount of technology that needs to be developed now. I'm not saying that we've run out of things to make. It's quite the contrary. It's just that where the focus is going is into a lot of toys, is into a lot of distractions from the actual real things. The real things are not things that are necessarily sexy or cool, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that's there for us to grab. But if we can put the energy to take that, we can actually develop something real. We can have our own mobile phone infrastructure that is completely open and controlled by us. That we can have real anonymous cryptocurrencies deployed in for making decentralized markets. We can create exchanges with dark pools through zero-knowledge proofs, and develop with blockchain, develop the next generation of communications and routing networks. And also, we can make the hardware to be able to deploy cryptocurrency on a national scale, as a national currency of a country. And lastly, that at the top is the paper about our project, which people can download. These are my contact details. Also, we're looking for money. Like right now, I just need about 40K. So thank you.